In 2010, when the Cave Creek Film and Art Festival folded, we decided that some of the money should be allocated towards the production of a documentary film. Cave Creek Uncovered is the story of Cave Creek, whose allure has always been about the land. The people of the desert foothills have always cared about the land. This film was done on behalf of the Cave Creek Museum and was one of my favorite projects.
This cave has incredible clues as to how we all got here. From the blackened fires on the ceiling to the petroglyphs on the walls, you can track the progress of humanity here from the Hohokam Indians to the Sinaguas to the hippies who lived here in the 1960s. And all of them tell a tale of how we got here to this place now. In fact, this is the cave that Cave Creek was named for.
This has been, because of the water supply and the easy access, open to Aborigines people for 5,000 years. We have all kinds of figures on how many people would be in a band of hunter-gatherers, and it goes all the way from 20 to 60 people. But they survived and they prospered, and they left a lot of stuff, mostly petroglyphs, in this area when they were there. The next people that came in were far later, and they were what we call periphery Hohokam. And they did come up here to the foothills to harvest all of the native fruits and things that come in spring through fall. And about 800, that again is a general date, they started living here permanently. Hohokams were some of the best farmers and water control engineers that have ever been around. They beat us on a lot of grades and different things. They were just amazing. Actually, the population completely declined. It was here from, say, 1 AD through 1150. But it declined at about that time. And this is really before the Great Drought hit the Southwest. But we sort of have the feeling that maybe they had used up the resources and their economic base, and we're now working on sort of the theory that this population may have moved farther east toward the Verde River. Everybody thinks that pottery sherds are around forever. They aren't. They're a limited resource. And if you take them out of contents, they mean nothing. And when you have pot hunters that go out indiscriminately, deface petroglyphs and dig just to get a pot, I just don't know how anybody can think they're that important. It's important to leave everything exactly like it is. So Cave Creek Museum is very lucky as a small museum to have the amount of extraordinary pottery that we have.
Dug in this earth till my hands are so raw, and my arms are like lead in the night.
People didn't come to Arizona for the water. They came here for the gold and later the silver. That was what brought people here. But let's go back a little bit to what got it all started, because people today don't realize that until about 1860, no white man ever dared venture, or the other Indians, the peaceful Indians, ever dared venture into this area north of the Gila River. Not the Salt River Valley, not any of this area, because it was under the control of the Tonto Apache and the Yavapai, and they didn't take too kindly to anybody coming here, especially prospectors. Well, the mining here began around 1874, 75, 76, right in there. There were really three mountains here that proved to be worth prospecting, that looked really promising, and also Cave Creek itself and the upper reaches of Cave Creek itself. Where there was Black Mountain, and then just to the east of there, where the Desert Mountain community is today, was Desert Mountain area, and then here Continental Mountain.
Geologically, when this mountain was formed, there was an upheaval, and where the granite and the shale have come together, it's a natural place for water. You can actually see in the canyon where the granite meets the shale. It's happened on Fleming Springs, it's happened on at Files Camp, and it's here at Hellings Camp. Gold is found in the granite. On the shale side of this property, they also mined tungsten.
And a lot of people always ask, how do you find gold? Where do you look for gold? Well, what you would do is start in the lower elevations, in the creeks and the streams, and pan for gold. You see any signs of gold down there, which is a good sign, what we're all looking for. And then what the prospectors would do back in them days, they would get on their burro, and they would start scouting this whole area, working their way up to the top of the mountains. What they're looking for is quartz, and I got a sample of quartz laying on top of the ground. And once you find this, if we were miners right now, our hearts would start to pound. This is what we're looking for. And so we'll start digging deep into the earth until we find a vein of quartz. Once we find the vein, we'll follow the vein. Whatever directions the veins travel underneath the earth is the directions of our mine shafts. And then what we're going to do is go inside, and we're going to follow the same gold vein as the miners did 100 plus years ago.
I have wandered this Arizona land, while my love waited for me to return. But the feel of the gold as it lies in my hand is much stronger than my love could burn.
See, I thought that having a gold mine, I would just like walk along and find like jewelry, but it's not that easy. That's placer gold, and we don't have that in Arizona. This gold was crushed. It's gold that exists in ore. That's what a stamp mill does.
I think that was 1915 the stamp mill came in. And they used arostras in here. They had, until they brought in stamp mills, that's all they had.
An arostra is just an area where a burro drags what's called a drag rock in a circle and actually crushes the ore.
Then they began to bring these stamp mills in. It would just, they turn on a cam wheel. You have an engine with a pulley on it, and that pulley would turn the cam, and the cam would lift the shoes, lift them up the bars up one at a time, and it was a real noise. But in those mining towns, it was music to their ears, they say, because that was money. That was jobs. That meant jobs. Remember, America had not had much hard currency at all to speak of until the gold rush to California in 1848-9. It really made America rich. Mark Twain used to refer to a miner as a liar with a hole in the ground. There was a whole lot of truth in what Mark Twain said, especially in this area, because for every good mine they had up here, somebody sold 50 worthless ones.
About 1870, the U.S. Army built its forts in Arizona. One was Fort McDowell. A Colonel, George Stoneman, toured the many forts that year. The purpose of his trips was to determine the direction and terrain the roads would cover in order to connect one fort with another. One such road connected Fort McDowell in the McDowell Mountains and Fort Whipple near Prescott, Arizona. It was always a pleasure to stop at Cave Creek in order to rest.
We are at the site of what is locally known as the Cavalry Remount Station. It's about 100 yards northeast or northwest of the site, a geographic site called Bubbling Springs, a place to rest, to resupply. If you need to go on, you get fresh horses. Simple as that. But it's also a place, as I say, forage for the animals, rest for the troopers. It's a small military, very small military base, if you will. And also it's a presence. The fact that they're here, there always would have been a few troopers here. The cavalry established a fort at Fort McDowell. They had a fort at Fort Whipple, which is Prescott. And they started patrolling between the two forts. And in 1869, General George Stoneman, was appointed commander of the District of Arizona. He did a tour of his forts. He left Fort McDowell and struck out towards New River and on from there to Fort Whipple. And this is a route that's been used by natives for thousands of years. Plus the fact that it was a much more direct route between Fort McDowell and Fort Whipple, which they cut at least a day off their travel time. And at the same time, it proceeded in pushing the Apache, the Tonto Apache were the main group here, back towards the Mogollon Rim, back towards the White Mountains. There actually are two Apache wars. First one was the Tonto Basin War, which dealt with the Tontos and to some extent the Yavapai, the Mojaves. And eventually, Stoneman was replaced by General George Crook, a very, very effective Indian fighter. And with Crook in command, they pretty well soon eliminated the Tontos everywhere west of the Salt River. And the second Apache War comes in the 1880s with what's called the Eastern or Southern Apache, the Chiricahua and the Mescaleros. That's Geronimo's time, Cochise, and those guys. So once again, Crook gets called back into the battle fray. He beats them up too. So George Crook fought two very successful campaigns with the Apache. Well, I think the Army came here, as I say, first of all, the idea of overall moving the Apache, but mining is the big story in Cave Creek. Gold. Gold has been found before the Civil War all around here. You have, as usual in American history, gold miners go into territory, supposedly the Indians' territory, they find gold, commerce follows, and all of a sudden you have conflict, people get killed, shot, they call for the military. Military comes in, moves the hostiles out. That's the pattern that repeated itself all across the last part of the 19th century. Manifest destiny. In other words, our right, our God-given right to occupy and exploit this continent.
In addition to the crusty miners and prospectors that hung out around here, they were not the only hardy people down in this area. Even though mining activity declined toward the turn of the 20th century, favorable weather and grazing conditions had always attracted more permanent settlers to the land. And lured by water, grass, and opportunity, homesteaders and ranchers too were among the early frontiersmen.
Most of these people came out here because were in the cattle and sheep and mining, because there were natural resources, abundance. If you go back and read your history at that time, the mindset of American people was not rape and plunder. It was the resources are inexhaustible. We can never run out of trees or grass or water. It's impossible, you know. So that's how a lot of this got started. And the meat industry provided a need for the growing population here and in the West in general. And our cattle back in early days ended up in the Chicago stockyards.
And in the late 1800s and early 1900s, the Cave Creek area was a riparian paradise. There was tremendous amounts of water. There was plenty of things growing in the area once you got off the desert floor from the Phoenix area.
Just after the Civil War ended in 1865, a young veteran came west looking for gold. Well, he didn't find the gold, but he found something else. His name was James Houck. He soon became a profitable businessman with a very large family. In 1900, he purchased Cave Creek Station, a trading post and rest stop for travelers, from a man named Jedder Hoskin, and established a sheep shearing business which flourished. However, grazing and shearing were only part of his commercial ventures. A veritable entrepreneur, Houck's holdings included a general store, barber shop, post office, saloon, as well as the stage which carried passengers, freight, and mail. Even the schoolhouse was on his homestead, and he had a kid in every grade. Close by, near the Phoenix mine, the town of Liscombe had already been established, but it did not survive the test of time like Houck's empire. For years, Cave Creek Station was a busy settlement with wagon traffic, drifters, miners, and cowboys. Sheep, too, now roamed the open range where the cattle fed, but this did not please the cattlemen whose cows were used to grazing peacefully along the creek.
The sheep were not a big problem as long as they stayed in their designated areas. We didn't mess with them, they didn't mess with us. If somebody was to take a band of sheep, and the band of sheep was 2,000, and these guys were running 10, 15, 20 bands of sheep together at a time, if they took them through a portion of the ranch, for a period of time after that, it would be pretty well slicked off until the next growing season of whatever. And we didn't think that was really quite neighborly, especially since we were working so damn hard to improve the range and to make it look better, to let this lawnmower go through.
Dated down to the roots. And so it wouldn't recover as quickly. That was the whole argument between cattlemen and sheepmen, is the cattle didn't graze the land down to the roots, and it would take twice as long to recover.
Our grandfather, when he was 16 years old, was involved in starting up what became the Cartwright Ranch with his father and his brothers. It was 1882 when he was 16. Over a period of years, he managed to acquire most of the assets of the other open range cattlemen in the area, and over a period of time acquired his brother's interest in it, all but Uncle Charlie, until about the end of the 30s. The Cartwright Ranch as we know it today existed as his only, and his brother had the ranch to the north of it. Yeah, the cattle came into this country probably before the Civil War. There were probably remnants and small cattle operations, and these are ones that were among the first ones that my grandfather bought out, put out. In those days, open range. Everybody has to take care of their percentage of cattle, according to the gentleman's agreement. If you didn't, everybody else picked up your slack, they picked up your slack. But if it got to the point where you weren't picking up your slack, somebody like Grandpa could send you a bill and papers to sign, publish it in the paper. If you wouldn't sign them, you've got so many days to pay up, or I own this place. Right. And you put the appropriate amount of money up in escrow, and it was up to his kids, family, him, whoever, to fight over it. But if you didn't hold up your end of the bargain, you lost the bargain. Well, my grandpa claimed that the reason he chose that area, he had looked at places in southern Arizona. If you remember the ranches in McClintock, and you just see miles and miles of beautiful grass, why wouldn't that be a better place? He could have gone there, because the people from up here had been down there, and they said, you ought to see what it looks like after a drought. You know, it looks like Macy's parking lot. And up north, yes, it's beautiful and all that, but if you ever have a drought, the same thing. You have to move your cattle, the winters are cold. This area down here may not be the prettiest, but it's always got water and it's always got feed.
And that is
You'll never have to supplemental feed, you never have to move cattle.
It was hard work.
It was terrible. The country is rough, the horses were tough, cattle by most people's estimation, would have been wild as deer, and scare the hell out of somebody that's never been exposed to it. We grew up, well, this is life. You know, it was the only thing we knew.
A majority of what we did was fun to us. It was work, working cattle, riding horses, fixing fence. About the only job I really hated the worst, I think, was clearing the irrigation ditch. It seemed to fall to me a lot.
I got to ride with them once in a while on the close, easy trips. And when one of them would get away and Dad would go get him or something, I wasn't allowed to do it. But once in a while, my horse, I was so small, my horse would take off and go with, you know, Jeff or Jack or whoever was out there, and, you know, run off. And it would cut and bring it back too. I mean, the horses knew what to do. They were very intelligent.
Growing up in those days, there was not a lot of activities for kids, schools, unless you were in school and had school activities. You were expected to work and do things around the house.
When I was growing up, traditional activities of young men were substantially curtailed because there were no females in Cave Creek between the ages of 12 and 30 years old. You figure out why. You know, we hear a lot on the news here the last few years. People want to make changes in certain laws and all that. Oh, we do that, we're going to turn this into the Wild West. Well, the Wild West was a hell of a lot more civilized place than the West is today.
Also, at the turn of the 20th century, health seekers came to this area seeking relief from tuberculosis. Before penicillin, people came to Arizona thinking they were going to die. Doctors could prescribe nothing more than dry air, good food, moderate exercise, and outdoor living. Spartan tent houses and one-room wooden cabins housed the many lungers who seemed to thrive on the desert. By the time of the Great Depression, the TB era ended, but the cabins did not outlive their usefulness. It's been rumored that these little houses were used by women who charged by the hour. Do you know what I'm saying? Okay, I think you do. Furthermore, the convalescent structures provided housing for the dam builders. Boom times began again in 1935 with the construction of the Cave Creek Dam. Completed in 1939, it was later known as Bartlett Dam. Also on the Verde River, construction began on Horseshoe Dam a few years later in 1944. It was completed in 1946. The village of Cave Creek was not destined to remain a sleepy little cow town. Construction workers and their families brought increased activity to the area, and new businesses opened. A temporary school was built, and newcomers crowded in for Saturday night shindigs. It's been reported that this was the wild era in Cave Creek, with over 13 saloons and not one church lining the main drag of Cave Creek. One of these saloons, the Corral Bar, was built by the aptly named Johnny Walker in 1936, and it was acquired in 1950 by Harold Gaffigan, who renamed it Harold's Cave Creek Corral. Here's the interesting part. It's the oldest surviving business in Cave Creek, and it hasn't lost its cachet to this day.
Riding down the brook bank, where many cattle have roamed. Riding down the brook bank.
In Arizona, dude ranching was so big when I came, and Wickenburg called themselves the dude ranch capital of the world.
It's quite possible that without guest ranches, visitors would have never discovered this beautiful desert. There was certainly plenty to do: swimming, horseback riding, hiking, mountain climbing, tracking game, looking for treasure in this outrageously wonderful place. Besides, there was a time when every boy wanted to grow up to be a cowboy. And lured by the exotic lifestyle of doing that, Easterners came out here and pay a lot of money to be a cowboy. And in that regard, Cave Creek was the true West.
Cap Joyce and Alf Lewis's brother, Mr. Lewis, the two of them were in Florence prison. And they got acquainted and they decided maybe they'd start a dude ranch when they got out. So anyway, that's how the Spur Cross Ranch got started, by a couple of convicts.
It was a working ranch, but it started out as a dude ranch way back in the 20s, and it failed. And then in later years, It was started up again as a dude ranch by Fred Knowles, who owned a diaper service, one of the first diaper services in Phoenix, and he started it up again, and that's who my father got it from. Had it from 1945 till 1952.
Rancho Mañana was started by the father of dude ranching in Arizona. His first dude ranch was the KL Bar in Wickenburg, and he had several others, and he ended up with Rancho Mañana. He was this real working cowboy, but he could also entertain people. Romaine Loudermilk was quite the entertainer. Sierra Vista was the last. Rancho Mañana quit about 55 as well. Sierra Vista quit about 62 when the out-of-state owners from Milwaukee, Doc and Gene Owen, decided they wanted to come out and live here.
Well, a dude was someone who thought they were a cowboy most of the time, or wanted to live the life of a cowboy, but most of them thought they were. And most of them wore high pants, way up here, never wore their pants long enough, and had to buy, you know, the real fancy shirts like the Roy Rogers and stuff like that.
I think it was the weather mainly, because once you came out and visited, you wanted to come back.
The fun times at the ranch were, you know, our Saturday nights, and then when we went horseback riding.
Remember at that time in the 50s, every other program on every main station channel in, you know, ABC, NBC, CBS, all those, the Westerns. And the romance of the West and the cowboys. That was just really big in those days. It's hard to describe, but Westerns were the thing. You watched 4 or 5 of them every night.
By the 1950s, Cave Creek was no longer an isolated hole in the wall north of Phoenix. Next door, 3 savvy businessmen established Carefree, a brand new business district and community. This pristine and beautiful desert environment presented commercial opportunities, and real estate developers promoted a building boom. Enhanced by the long-held notoriety that marked Cave Creek's reputation, the area had been discovered. And so we come back to the cave. And what remains unique about Cave Creek is the incredible characters, the diversity that all the people that emanated from this cave bring to this community. Merchants still open their trendy, outrageous businesses. Cowboys are still riding the range. Hippies are still around here somewhere. And we have bikers and biker gangs. We even have religious sects here. And what binds all these people together is a unique love for the high Sonoran Desert.
I think the character of Cave Creek, and it remains true today, and that character was identified with a fierce independence. It was true right from the beginning of the founding of Cave Creek in 1870. You have a cast of characters that started way back then and continue through this day.
It's always been live and let live, and everybody's had respect for each other in spite of what may be said and what may be done. There's been a mutual respect there.
I know at council meetings, when there is a controversial issue that comes up for discussion, the characters come out in full force, and they are plenty and they are varied. But that's part of the allure of this community, for people to come here and live. You're not going to get bored in Cave Creek. That is never going to happen.
This may be disappointing. I don't think anything makes us anything special. You know, we were just a small town, rural town. Nobody lived out here. There was some cattle ranches and some mines. And then eventually people started moving out here.
And believe it or not, we could actually discuss these things many times and come to a very positive outcome. And I think what we see in our town today is the results of it.
On Sunday afternoon, Corky would say, "Okay, boys, let's hit the road." And so my son and her two sons, they would get in the car, and Corky would drive them around town or even beyond, and they would knock all the real estate signs down. So that would be, didn't want progress.
The kids get in trouble. Everybody knows about it. Before they even get home, the mother knows.
Yeah.
Takes a village to raise the kids.
That's right. You're absolutely
And I think
right.
that was a living example of it long before that ever
We
became the thing
raised
to
each
say.
other's children.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I think I have always felt that way, that I could depend on my neighbors.
And then in about the 1980s, it seemed like other people found out that it was neat up here. It was cool. And we were very much in danger of being loved to death.
If we wanted to remain our own town with our own philosophies and our own way of life, and we're pretty set in both of those, we knew we had to incorporate. And yes, it was a big fight because a lot of people said no. And I have to say, I understand why they felt that way, because it always been that way, didn't have to incorporate. But a lot of them didn't see that threat that was coming up the road. And right, as we all know, a part of the area that should be Cave Creek is now part of Phoenix as a result.
We were required, this is probably state law, we were required to get the permission of every municipality within, I think, 3 miles of our proposed boundaries.
Who were they?
Phoenix, Scottsdale, and Carefree. Carefree had incorporated already.
And unfortunately, Carefree incorporated before Cave Creek did. And as a result of that, we lost our entrance to Cave Creek, coming up Cave Creek Road, because we had to have permission of the contiguous municipalities and our county to incorporate, and Carefree would not give Cave Creek permission to incorporate unless they took the west side of the mountain and the northwest corner of Cave Creek and Carefree Highway.
The breed of people that moved here changed it. You know, they cut off our washes, they put fences across so you can't even go up a wash hardly anymore.
When they first started putting those fences up, I cut them so I could ride through. I will tell you that.
When I think about the forces that have come together, I think, to bring Cave Creek where it is now with its emphasis on conservation, I think the Land Trust had an immense amount to do with that. The people who started the Land Trust were the same people who supported incorporation because they wanted to preserve the desert.
We gathered together a group of people who were interested in incorporating and attempting to do some desert preservation. We knew that even though the town had incorporated, the town of Cave Creek existed that time, had since 1986, but it was still very
unruly?
Undeveloped. It really had a lot to do to become a stable government.
The focus of Cave Creek is always going to be its land, and now the question becomes is how to best preserve that.
The permanent water that is found here at the Jewel and a few other places up and downstream is critical to wildlife. As we've learned, over 90% of all wildlife in the desert depends on such areas at some point in their life cycle. And of the riparian areas in Arizona, over 90% have disappeared in a little over 100 years. So it's critical that the remnants be protected for wildlife. The area that we see here, even in the worst part of the drought, has always had water. We're sitting on a billion-year-old formation called Gojon Diorite, and it forces water to the surface. And that is
not found in many other places in this entire area. But that's why you see the cottonwoods, the willows, this wonderful canopy that supports birds and the other mammals and amphibians that we can hear sometimes croaking up and down the creek.
But I think it's significant in terms of the ability to maintain this, the presence of the wildlife, the way it is, keeping things the way they have always been, which after all was one of the goals that we set out to meet, was to keep things the way they were.
The preservation of Spur Cross came about over a decade of time. The land was owned privately by two interests, and off and on they would put out feelers that they wanted to develop the land. And it began as a grassroots effort here in Cave Creek, that is the aspiration to preserve that land. And one thing was apparent, it was owned by somebody, so the land was going to have to be purchased.
People who can't stand each other under normal circumstances came together and worked on this, and we taxed ourselves.
This wonderful 2,000 and some acre ranch just north of town with the Tonto Forest on the other side of it was going to be developed. And this wasn't the first time over the years, but this time it really was going to happen. It was going to be developed. It was going to shut us off from the Tonto Forest and from all these hiking opportunities, but it was going to use the town as a doormat. Spur Cross Road, it had to have been boulevarded, there would have been traffic, the golf course would have run along the jewel of the creek, the last free-running stream in Maricopa County.
I think it's sacred land. I think it's Indian land. I think it has power, and it uses us as tools. We think we preserved it, but I actually think there's an energy here that uses us.
Cave Creek was willing and to put forth an effort where the citizens taxed themselves. There was also an effort put forth on behalf of the state and the county to put up money, actually $7.5 million each, in order to preserve the land. So an alliance was formed, and it's the type of alliance that probably will never happen again, that included a local government, state, and also county governments for the specific purpose of identifying in this case, 2,500 acres of land and saying, this is special, and it is so special that it is worth being preserved.
I would like to see Cave Creek stay very much the way it is. I would like to see it continue to be an art destination, a fun destination, you know, for the cowboy bars and things like that. I would like to see people move in here who have the same feelings that most of us already have. I really don't see Cave Creek being spoiled a whole lot if we just keep on the way we've been keeping on.
No town has it any better than this town as far as being a rural, picturesque community and having that kind of feeling. If you sit in Big Earl's and have a sandwich and watch the people go by, it still has that small town atmosphere that everybody is looking for.
Every time I drive home and I look at those mountains, it still does it to me. Every single time. I think that I'm very, very fortunate. I think it's a piece of heaven. I do.
What makes you a creeker? Because you're a creeker.
No, I don't even like that word.
Do I look like a creeker?
No, I don't even like that, Cave Creek. I'm a Cave Creek person.
No, I am not a creeker.
If they can't bother to say Cave Creek,
That is perfect.
Inside this cave are clues how we got to where we are today. Archaeologists have been digging in this area, and we found this, proving conclusively that all politics in Cave Creek emanate from the jawbone of an ass.